Hello. Today I'm going to go over the difference between a political party and a political ideology. Up until this point in our unit, we've been talking about political parties. So right now, I am sure many of you are thinking Democrats and Republicans. Democrats and Republicans are the group of voters with broad common interests who want to influence or control the decision making in the government. The political party is the group, but it is not the belief system. So today we're going to introduce a new idea. We're going to introduce the political ideology. And in the word ideology, you may kind of see it here. It's the ideas. It's the thinking. It's what a individual's personal views or thoughts are about how our society should work. And our views, people have all different ideologies. And the political ideology is the thinking, and it is more of a spectrum. It is not just a member of the group. People of certain political ideologies do tend to join the same political party. We tend to say, for example, more people with more of a liberal ideology tend to be part of more of the Democratic Party, and people with more of a conservative ideology tend to be more part of the Republican Party. But that's not always true. So today we're going to be talking about what are your political views? What are your political thoughts and ideas? And what is your political ideology? So as I've just mentioned, I mentioned two of the main ideologies that you probably have heard before. They are liberal or conservative. These are two of the main ideas. In the idea of a liberal ideology, it tends to be more government involvement in one's individual life. It also tends to be about the idea of change and progression. The conservative ideology tends to believe in less federal government involvement in one's individual life and more of the idea of tradition, keeping things the way that they have been done before. The main question you want to ask yourself when you're developing or learning or understanding your own political ideology is how much government involvement do you want in your daily life? To kind of bring these two viewpoints to life, for no pun intended, we are going to look at certain issues. As I just said, the liberal ideology tends to be more federal government involvement with maybe more change involvement in that, with the federal government leading the charge. The conservative viewpoint is less federal government, probably more emphasis on state and local governments, and more keeping things the way that they've always been done. One of the always a hot topic that is addressed by both liberals and conservatives is the idea of taxes. Taxes is money that is spent for public goods or services. If you tend to believe more of the liberal ideology, you're okay with higher levels of federal taxes because those federal taxes would go to social programs that would benefit all people in the country. If you have more of a conservative viewpoint on the issue of taxes, you would like to reduce federal taxes and even if that means reducing federal programs, but the idea that maybe states and local governments are more prepared to provide those services that individuals need. They are also on the mindset that tax breaks should be higher for businesses or corporations. If a business or corporation has more money and they're spending less money on taxes, then they're able to maybe hire more employees, and individuals will be able to provide services for themselves rather than the government providing more for a larger group. The next issue we'll talk about here is national defense. And here is where a good point to highlight is that notice both liberals and conservatives believe in a strong national defense. Everyone agrees that we want our country to be safe and protected. That is ultimately the same goal. All liberals and conservatives want what's best for the country. They want the same goal. It's how we're going to get there. So national defense, we see that. We want our country to be safe. The liberal stance is more emphasis on conflict resolution, sending troops to areas where there is conflict around the world to protect American interests, but also global interests. Again, oftentimes that might require more military, more federal government spending, but it is more federal government involvement. Historically, the conservative stance is to be more isolationist, to be America first, to focus on our interests, less on foreign conflict. And again, that typically would mean less federal government involvement in foreign conflicts. Another major issue is healthcare or welfare. Welfare is social programs that tend to be provided to those in poverty. And here we're seeing that the liberal stance would be that health insurance and social programs would be funded by the federal government, probably also connecting back to taxes, that there would be a higher level of federal tax to provide those programs, but it would be on a national stance, that there would be health insurance for all or Medicaid for all. That, again, a same program for all Americans. The conservative stance would say that the state and private organizations are more equipped to handle a smaller group and the interests of that smaller group. Not that the federal government should not be as involved, but state and local governments and businesses should be more involved in the health and welfare of the people that they are connected to. Again, we're seeing these are generally speaking the differences of liberals versus conservative, liberal versus conservative. Now, as I said, this is not a clear cut. This is not a grouping. This is actually more of what we'd say a spectrum. And in fact, I'm going to describe this more as a target board. Okay, so imagine this is the target and there is different ideologies placed on this target. The reason why I'm using this target board to describe political ideologies is because we are about to do a survey, and based on your survey results, you will see your political ideology on a spectrum of this sort. So I did change one word. We will tend to see the word liberal or conservative. However, the survey you're going to take is going to use the word progressive. So the idea of the liberal progressive viewpoint, again, is that more federal government, but it's also this idea of change, doing things differently. The conservative stance, as we've just talked about, is less federal government involvement and more of this idea of tradition, remaining things the way that they have always been. And I'd like to introduce this large square in the middle. This is often called the moderate viewpoint, or as you're going to see it on the one on the survey you're about to take, the centrist perspective. And again, I like to kind of use my M's here. Most Americans, middle, moderate. Most Americans find themselves somewhere in the moderate viewpoint. Very few people want total radical change and total federal government involvement in their life. Very few people also want no federal government involvement in life and have a very traditional way of life of the way, you know, our America always used to be. So again, those are the extremes. So most people find themselves somewhere in the middle, depending on the issue. Maybe more federal government involvement, maybe let's say in gun control, but less federal government involvement in healthcare. So you can have a liberal viewpoint on one issue, but a conservative viewpoint on another. The other two ideas I'd like to mention is this idea of libertarian and authoritarian. This is who is the deciding factor, who is making the decisions. If you are authoritarian, you probably hear that word authority in there. That means that there's a centralized decision maker, that there is a group of people that are leading the change or leading the decisions making within our society or government. Libertarian would be more individual choice, would be the idea that the government shouldn't be telling less of what happens in my daily life. And so you can be a progressive libertarian. You can be very focused on individual freedoms and individual choice, but also very much wanting progressive change. You can be a conservative authoritarian. You can believe in a strong centralized government with the idea that it's focused on a traditional way of life. So, but again, keep in mind this big central box, the big moderate viewpoint, is that most Americans don't find themselves on the extremes, but most people find themselves in the center. You're about to find out where you stand.